Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Mormons. Today we're going to be doing chapter 37, more of the same, a continuation just from the last chapter, more of the historical section. So this chapter is just really like you would find it in the Book of Kings. I imagine most of you have read that at some point, although it may be a little hazy now, but this is just more of the same, what happens after the representatives come in. Remember last time the representatives came out, listened to this Rabshakeh guy basically saying, surrender or die, and they go in and they talk to Hezekiah, and this is what happens. So, chapter 37 is the response for that, and God's rescue of Jerusalem. Now, this is something that kind of the whole book revolves around. That's why we brought it up before, but now we're going to get more detail on it so that it can kind of make some sense. It will also be critical for what happens next, because you'll notice, as we said last time, so much of Judah has been destroyed at this point that really only Jerusalem was left. And Jerusalem gets saved, but it's the only one, really. All the other cities have been destroyed, so Jerusalem's the only one that gets saved. So in some ways it's kind of a hollow victory, and people start to really think about what Isaiah is going to start to address more after our brief narrative interruption that we've had here. He's going to start to talk about other gods and say, we talk about these other gods like they're real, but they're not. And so he'll go in and say we shouldn't even really be calling them gods. And this is kind of a difficult issue that gets taken up by later people, and there's some thought about these old gods actually being demons and stuff like that, and that's a difficult issue to deal with, and also we don't exactly know how all of that worked, but it does definitely seem that Isaiah downgrades them. They aren't even to be considered gods anymore. They're something less than gods. So that's what he talks about later on here. And people say this is a result of the Babylonian captivity. I think it's a result of this, what we're going to talk about in this chapter. Yes, God wins, Jehovah wins against Ashur, but just barely. Now, Ashur, remember, is the god of the Assyrians. So, Jehovah, the God of Israel and Judah, beats Ashur, the God of the Assyrians, but he doesn't save them until the very last minute, when Jerusalem's just about, it looks like, to get taken. Then God saves them. So it's a kind of uncomfortable victory, and like I said, Isaiah's going to have to deal with that. So the rest of the groundwork, honestly, for the rest of the book of Isaiah is set up in this chapter. So we're going to deal with that a little bit today. So let's just dive into it here. And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes, and covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests covered with sackcloth, unto Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. And they said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke, and of blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. It may be the Lord thy God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master hath sent to reproach the living God, and he will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that is left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. So here in verse 1 it says, And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth. Now this, you may have noticed in other parts of the Old Testament, this is a traditional sign of mourning. You rend your garments and you cover yourself with sackcloth, which is it's almost like what you would see in a burlap bag today, a very rough, coarse kind of garment, meant to show mourning. But then he goes into the house of the Lord. So his first response, Hezekiah's first response, when he hears this terrible news that the Assyrians are outside, they've taken out Lachish, they've taken out everyone, they're coming to destroy Jerusalem, the response that he makes to this is to go to the temple. He goes into the house of the Lord. And I think that that's an interesting response. Hezekiah is depicted as a really good king because he becomes a really good king. But he isn't always a really good king. There are parts of the book of Isaiah where Isaiah is going to call Hezekiah out for doing stuff he's not supposed to do. But Hezekiah, by this point, has apparently become somebody who has his priorities straight. He immediately goes to the house of the Lord, because he knows what Isaiah has been saying all this time is right. Only Jehovah can save them. And it says, and he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests covered with sackcloth, unto Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. So he goes to the temple, and he sends his representatives that we've seen in the last chapter to go talk to Isaiah, because he knows Isaiah is a prophet. He knows Isaiah is going to be able to get a message from God. So this is what they say to Isaiah. They said to him, thus saith Hezekiah, this day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke, and of blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. So they say, this is a really bad day. Bad things are happening. We're being rebuked, presumably, by this Rabshakeh. He's troubling and rebuking us and blaspheming us. And the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. I think this is the idea that Hezekiah was trying to create a newly independent nation, one that was not under the thumb of the Assyrians, because they were kind of free before, but they kind of were not. They were basically an Assyrian vassal. So Hezekiah is trying to break free and become completely independent, instead of being sort of under the thumb of Assyria. And this birth of this new nation, the children are come to the birth, the children are ready to be born, but the woman cannot push out the baby. That's the image. So this new nation is just about to be born, but suddenly we may be in trouble. There's not strength to bring forth. How are we going to survive this? We've come this far, and now it's going to end in Lachish-style siege, and the whole kingdom is going to be destroyed. So it says, in verse 4, it may be the Lord thy God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master hath sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that is left. So they say to him, maybe God will hear the blasphemy that Rabshakeh said on behalf of the king of Assyria, reproaching the living God, calling out God really, and saying, how could you possibly save these people? There's no way Jehovah can save Jerusalem. And he will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. So God will basically hear these words and come down and say, oh really, I can't save them? You think I can't save them, Rabshakeh and Sennacherib? I'm going to go do it right now. So that's the idea, that maybe God's going to do this. So, they say, in hopes that God will do this, Isaiah, lift up thy prayer for the remnant that is left, those that have not been destroyed by the Assyrians. Isaiah, please pray for us all, the last little bit of the kingdom that's surviving. So this is what in verse 5, so the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. This is what they said to Isaiah, in other words. So in response to this, Isaiah says, Isaiah said unto them, thus shall ye say unto your master, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and return to his own land. And I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So Isaiah says, listen, I know this is bad, but go back to Hezekiah and say, quoting God, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard. I know the biggest army in the world is knocking on your door. They've destroyed everything else. But don't be afraid. This is kind of an amazing thing that he's saying here, but it turns out to be exactly right. Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Don't be afraid of everything that you've heard, saying, Jehovah is not going to deliver you. That's what the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed him in saying, that Jehovah doesn't have the power to save them. And he says, no, don't worry about it. Jehovah will come through. And he says, behold, I, speaking for the Lord, behold, I will send a blast upon him, send a desolation upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. This is exactly what's going to happen in the rest of the chapter. An angel of the Lord comes out and slays 185,000 of them. We'll talk about how that happens. he will hear a rumor, the Egyptians are coming, the Nubians are coming up to eliminate the rest of you. So he turns tail and runs. He returns to his own land. And I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. That's exactly what happens. The king is praying back in his own land and is killed by his own family members. So what Isaiah is saying here, as amazing as it sounds, is exactly what happened. Now, how does this happen? We need to piece together some of these chapters. They may not be in chronological order. Chapters 37 through 39, in fact, are probably not in chronological order. They're arranged sort of topically, and so it's hard to realize what's happening. But if we change the chronology a little bit to be probably what is the right chronology, we see how exactly God is saving the Israelites and saving Judah specifically. Because we have this disease that happens. Hezekiah gets sick in the next chapter. So presumably what's happening is that chapter should be switched into the middle here. That there was some disease that fell upon everybody, and it made the people in Jerusalem a bit sick, but it totally decimated the Assyrians. So that's probably what we're getting here. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. And he heard say concerning Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, he has come forth to make war with thee. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands by destroying them utterly. Shalt thou be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan, and Haran, and Reseph, and the children of Edom which were in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arphad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, Hena and Ivah? So once again, we're getting the same rhetoric from the messengers. So Rabshakeh leaves the city because apparently he doesn't get an answer. So he leaves and finds the king of Assyria warring against Libnah. So he's fighting another city down in that area. He said he heard he was departed from Lachish. So Lachish is finished. He goes down to Libnah to fight. And it says, And he heard say concerning Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, He's come forth to make war against thee. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying this. So what's happened is he knows he's out of time now. He's fighting against this city, Libnah, after leaving Lachish, probably one of the last loose ends in the area. And then he hears that the king of Ethiopia, the Cushite king, the Nubian kings down south, are coming up to attack them. This guy, Tirhakah. And he says, oh no, I need to take out Jerusalem before Tirhakah gets here. I can't fight a two-front war right now. I need to eliminate Jerusalem, and then I can concentrate all my energies on the Nubians. So he sends an envoy to Hezekiah saying, Hey, Hezekiah, you need to surrender right now. Basically. He says, the God that you're relying on cannot save Jerusalem. Surrender now. And that's what he says. Let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands by destroying them utterly. Shalt thou be delivered? He says, this is ridiculous. Surrender. It's done. You're done. But what's funny about this is that he's a little bit nervous, probably. That's probably why he's sending this second message. He is a little bit nervous because he doesn't want to have to deal with the Nubians and besiege Jerusalem at the same time. That's going to be important later. So he says, have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed? And he lists all these cities all over the empire. The children of Edom, which were in Telassar. We don't actually know exactly where that is, but that's an interesting place name. He says, all these people have been destroyed. None of the other gods were able to protect them. Do you really think Jehovah is going to save you? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arphad, the king of the city of Sepharvaim, Hena and Ivah? These are cities that are just getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. None of these deities were able to save them. how are you possibly thinking that Jehovah is going to save you, in other words. But Hezekiah is unruffled. Well, he's a little bit ruffled. He goes to pray about it. But I like his prayer. It says, "And Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up unto the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord." So he goes up to pray in the house of the Lord and brings the letter with him. It's kind of an interesting thing that happens, almost to say, look at this. Look at what he said. I know that this is wrong. You can read it yourself and see that it's wrong. So Hezekiah prayed unto the Lord, saying, "O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, that dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth. Incline thine ear, O Lord, and hear. Open thy eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which hath sent to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their countries, and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. Now therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord, even thou only." So he says, "O Lord of hosts, God of Israel," a reminder of his identity as he who causes armies to be, because if ever Hezekiah needed an army, it was right now. "O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, that dwellest between the cherubims." This is a funny little translational issue in the King James. It should be cherubim. Cherubim is already plural. The I-M ending in Hebrew is a plural already. So it probably should just be translated cherubs. But they just took the Hebrew word and just used English letters to spell it out. So it's cherubim. And then they said, oh, we'll add an S to the end, so it's plural. So it's kind of a funny thing. It should really just be translated cherubs. But what does this mean? Thou that dwellest between the cherubims. So these cherubs were not the cherubs that we think of in Renaissance art, these cute little fat angels flying around. The cherubims were these almost griffin-looking beasts, these big lions with wings, basically. We have depictions of them from other parts of the ancient Near East. At least that's the assumption. It's hard to say exactly what these looked like, but it was probably something like that. In other parts of the Old Testament and Psalms, you can actually ride cherubs. It actually says that I'm going to get on my cherub and ride around. So apparently it's not quite a little angel. It's more like a steed, a flying steed. Some kind of big lion-like steed, presumably. So it says, dwellest between the cherubims. Presumably there are cherubims that flank the throne of God. And that's the depiction that we get in the temple. Right? The temple has cherubs all around it. They're embroidered onto the curtain right in front of the Ark of the Covenant with the Holy of Holies. There are statues, winged beings on both sides. These are also cherubs on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant. Even the top of the Ark of the Covenant has some. So these are all over the Ark of the Covenant. This idea that there are these cherubs, these divine guardian figures that are there sort of surrounding the throne of God. So that's the reference here. That dwellest between the cherubims, the one sitting enthroned in the temple, in other words. Thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. This is the gist of everything Isaiah's been saying so far. Why do you think he does the burdens against the nations? This is the point. All the kingdoms of the earth are subject to Jehovah. He says, thou hast made heaven and earth. This is very important. The idea that Jehovah is the one that made everything is hugely important. Some people will look at that and say that's a later innovation. I don't think so. We have here the idea that Jehovah is the one that made everything. That makes him superior to all other so-called deities and the ruler of the entire earth. That's what's being the point that's being made here. If he's made heaven and earth, he's over all heaven and earth, which means that he's better than Ashur, the god of the Assyrians. Incline thine ear, O Lord, and hear. Open thine eyes, O Lord, and see. He says, listen to me right now and look at what I have. See the letter that I have. Hear all the words of Sennacherib, which hath sent to reproach the living God. Sennacherib is the king of Assyria, if you'll remember. He says, look at everything this guy has said against you, the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their countries. So Hezekiah admits, yeah, this is true. He has totally eliminated all these other nations and countries, but they're nations and their countries, so presumably major cities and the districts surrounding them. So he's eliminated everything. And they cast their gods into the fire. But they weren't real gods, he says. They were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. He says, yes, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, has destroyed everything. All these nations, all the surrounding areas. He's thrown their gods into the fire, but that's because they weren't really gods anyway. They were just idols, wood and stone. So it's easy to destroy wood and stone, but not you. Now therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord, even thou only. Now the Lord, in this sentence, he who causes armies to be, is probably implied. It is now therefore, O Lord our God, Jehovah our God, save us from his hand, so all the kingdoms of the earth, everyone in the world, may know that thou art the Lord, presumably implied, the Lord of hosts, he who causes armies to be, even thou only. You are the best war god in the history of war gods. It's time for you to prove it. Please save us. Right? That's the implication, I think, of this prayer. Come and save us now. If ever we needed your help, it's now. And everyone will see what you do for us and know that you are the best. And in fact, not just that you're the best, that you're actually the only God. So then in 21 it says, Then Isaiah the son of Amos sent unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Whereas thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib king of Assyria, this is the word which the Lord has spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed, and against whom hast thou exalted thy voice, and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. By thy servants hast thou reproached the Lord, and hast said, By the multitude of my chariots I am come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon. And I will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof. And I will enter into the height of his border, and the forest of his Carmel. I have digged and drunk water, and with the sole of my feet have I dried up all the rivers of the besieged places. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass that thou shouldst be to lay waste to fenced cities and to ruinous heaps. Therefore their inhabitants were of small power, they were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field, and as the green herb, and as the grass on the rooftops, and as corn blasted before it be grown up. But I know thy abode, and thy going out and thy coming in, and thy rage against me. Because thy rage against me and thy tumult is come up into mine ears, therefore will I put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest. And this shall be a sign unto thee. Ye shall eat this year such as groweth of itself, and the second year that which springeth of the same. And in the third year sow ye, and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat the fruit thereof, and the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward, and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion, the zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. Now, this is quite the statement from Isaiah, and this does feel a little bit like Isaiah. I wonder if this is not something that may have been extracted from Isaiah's actual speeches and inserted in here. Like I said, the other stuff doesn't feel like Isaiah, but this feels a little bit more like Isaiah. It may not be, but it's hard to say. It at least kind of feels like it to me. So, Hezekiah prays this amazing prayer and then gets his answer, but he gets his answer through Isaiah. he comes to Hezekiah and says, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I know you just finished writing to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria. So this is what God says. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee." Now this is presumably talking about Jerusalem. The virgin, the one city that hasn't been taken, as it were, by the Assyrians. The daughter of Zion. Zion is another name for the mountain there where the temple is. So Jerusalem, in other words, hath despised thee, and laughed thee to scorn. Jerusalem is just making fun of you right now. The daughter of Jerusalem has shaken her head at thee. So this is an amplification showing, yes, indeed, this is Jerusalem specifically, is just sitting here making fun of you, Sennacherib. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. So he says, who do you think you are making fun of, Sennacherib and Rabshakeh? Who are you lifting your voice up against? Who do you think I am? You're lifting up your eyes on high, thinking that I'm not there, like I'm not going to come and destroy you. He says, you've made a big mistake. You've been making fun of the Holy One of Israel. And remember, holy in some periods has an implication of strength and being more powerful than everyone else. That, I think, is the implication here. He's the Holy One of Israel, the God who is the best war god in the history of war gods. And he says, really? You can make fun of me? In 24 it says, by thy servants hast thou reproached the Lord, and hast said, by the multitude of my chariots am I come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon. I will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof. I will enter into the height of his border, and the forest of his Carmel. It says, by your servants you have made fun of Jehovah, and said, yeah, my chariots are how I'm going to do this. I have so many chariots, I'm just going to come up. It says, to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon. Lebanon is kind of a mountainous area that has a lot of really tall trees, and that's the image being taken up here, to the sides of Lebanon. I'm going to take out the most majestic possible place. That's the idea. I'm going to take over the entire world, no matter how tall or majestic. I will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof. The idea of cutting down nations as though you were just cutting down trees. And indeed, cutting down the tallest nations, the most powerful nations, like they were just trees. And the choice fir trees thereof. And I will enter into the height of his border and the forest of his Carmel. So this is, I will enter into the highest part of his country and go into the forest of his Carmel, and the Carmel region is up north in northern Israel. So he's going to take out these most majestic areas by himself. At least that's what he's saying to himself. He's praising himself for his great understanding and might and valor and warfare. 25, he says, I have digged and drunk water. With the sole of my feet have I dried up all the rivers of the besieged places. He says, I've gone in, and just the sole of my feet, he's dried up the rivers of the besieged places. Just by walking there and presumably actually drinking water, right? He brings his army in, and there's so many of them, they drink all the streams dry as they go through. And I've dried up all the rivers of the besieged places. So this idea that it's just ridiculously easy for him to take out all these places. I've dried up all the rivers of the besieged places. Almost as though even once he's made it to places that he's besieging, he just has to draw a little line with his foot to divert all the water away from the city. It's just this exaggeration of him talking about how great he is. And he says, I've been drinking water, but I've been denying water to all the people I've been besieging. Hast thou not heard how long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass that thou shouldst speed to lay waste defenced cities into ruinous heaps. So this is God responding to the bragging of the king of Assyria. Hast thou not heard how long ago how I have done it? I planned this forever ago, Sennacherib. This is not you. And of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass that thou shouldst be to lay waste defense cities into ruinous heaps. I'm the one that's made this happen. I'm the one that's helped you and allowed you to do this because I wanted it to happen. I wanted Judah to wake up. So I allowed you to come in and lay waste all their defense cities so that they would be ruins. That's why. Therefore, their inhabitants were of small power. That's why they weren't able to stand up to you. They were dismayed and confounded. Why? Because I was doing this. They were as the grass of the field, and as the green herb, and as the grass on the housetops, and as corn blasted before it be grown up. So the idea is, he keeps talking about things that are weaker and weaker. Grass of the field, easy to mow. Green herbs, delicate herbs, even easier to pick. The grass on the housetops, presumably just a little tiny bit of grass that's able to grow on the roof. If you have a place that has a flat roof, a little bit of water and dirt will probably collect, and you'll get a little tiny bit of grass growing on the roof. That's probably what he's talking about here. But obviously that's super easy to get rid of. He says, and as corn blasted before it be grown up. Grain that is destroyed, that's already dead, that is obviously the most easy thing to pick up. So it says their inhabitants were easier and easier to destroy. Why? Because I was the one doing this, Jehovah says. But I know thy abode, and thy going out, and thy coming in, and thy rage against me. God says, I know exactly what you're doing. I know where you're coming from. I know where you're going. I know where you're going to go now. And I know what you've said against me, because thy rage against me and thy tumult is come up into mine ears. Yeah, I've heard what you said against me, Sennacherib. So will I put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest. So God says, in effect, I've been the one in control this whole time, and now I'm going to remind you of it. Just like you might put a hook in the nose of a fish. You catch a fish, and it goes through the top of the lip and kind of comes out part of the nose. Some of you may have seen that sometimes when you catch a fish in kind of a funny way. Therefore, will I put my hook in thy nose. I'm using that imagery probably as a fish and not a horse, because you see that sometimes in Job. So that's probably what we're looking at. It may also be something like a horse or a bull. I put my hook in thy nose. You may put a ring through the nose of a bull or something like that, so you can pull it around easier. So it's either one of those things. But the idea is, whichever it is, he's in complete control, as though you were some kind of animal that he was catching or had domesticated. So I'll put thy hook on thy nose and my bridle in thy lips. So once again, the bridle that you put on a horse so you can steer it exactly where you want it. It says, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest. It says, I'm the one in complete control of you, Sennacherib, and I will make you go exactly where I want you to go. And right now, I want you to turn back and go home. So that's what I'm going to make you do. And this shall be a sign unto thee, ye shall eat this year such as groweth of itself, and the second year that which springeth of the same. So now he's switched back to talking to Sennacherib. This shall be a sign to thee, not Sennacherib, to Hezekiah. Ye shall eat this year such as groweth of itself, and the second year that which springeth of the same. You will eat the grain that you have that's growing, and you'll just keep on keeping on. The third year sow ye, and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat the fruits thereof. All your agriculture is going to go the way that it's supposed to go. And the remnant that has escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. But you have to understand, the countryside's probably been devastated, so this is kind of really is a sign. Shall eat this year such as groweth of itself. Presumably, they have not been able to plant. Everything's been destroyed by the Assyrians. They haven't been able to plant. But there's been enough seed dropped that stuff is going to be able to grow. And the second year, the grain will just continue to produce, because the countryside's totally empty. It's going to take a while for them to go out and sort of recolonize Judah now. There's just a bunch of people in Jerusalem, but that's probably it. So they're going to have to spread out and settle the land. So the first year, agriculture is just going to grow on its own. The second year, it's going to drop seeds and continue to grow. The second year, that which springeth of the same. But in the third year, you will do what you usually do. You'll sow and reap and plant vineyards and eat the fruit thereof. So God's going to make sure agriculture goes on as normal, but it's going to be kind of a sign, because they're going to have to spread out and recolonize the land. This is going to be a hugely important theme of the second part of Isaiah, is them recolonizing everything after the Assyrians have destroyed it. It says, "And the remnant that has escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward." So just like the agriculture is going to grow and take root, spread their roots into the ground and bear fruit growing up, Judah, those that have not been killed, are going to do the same. They're going to spread out, they're going to resettle their land, they're going to put down roots, as it were, and start to bear fruit again. "For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion. The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this." So a lot of the rest of what Isaiah is saying is talking about them recolonizing their land, resettling the land, after it has been completely decimated by the Assyrians. He says, "The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this." And this may be kind of the jealousy of the Lord of hosts, the enthusiasm of the Lord of hosts for his people is going to do this. He loves his people so much that he's going to make sure that they escape, they go out from Mount Zion, from Jerusalem, and resettle the land. So then he calls out the king of Assyria again. "Therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake." Then the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So he says, God says concerning the king of Assyria, not only is he not going to even come into this city, he's not going to shoot an arrow there, he's not going to go up with shields even, or cast a bank against it. Now, this is kind of funny, because you get some impression from other parts of Isaiah that this might be a little bit of an exaggeration, that they started to build a siege tower and siege ramps and things like that, but that it didn't actually make it right up to the city. So this is maybe a little bit of an exaggeration. As we say, this is kind of done a little bit later on. So in retrospect, this may not be quite right, but it's close enough. He doesn't come into the city. He probably doesn't even bother shooting arrows there, because he's probably starting to build things. He says they're not going to come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it. So presumably he starts building this bank, but it doesn't make it all the way up to Jerusalem. So presumably he starts to make preparations, but doesn't make it quite up to the city. That's what it seems like to me. And we talked about this before, that they would try to build ramps coming up into the city and try to tunnel through the walls, but that the opposing side would try to build ramps and walls coming up the other direction. Remember that part where they're kind of digging and piling up rubble? That's why they're calling out of the dust, because they're piling up this rubble to help build a ramp kind of opposing the other ramp, so that if the Assyrians do come in, they just run into more Judahite fortification. So that's probably what's happening. They start to make preparations, but they don't actually come to blows. That's the impression here. And it's probably a fairly accurate representation of what happens. It says, "By the way that he came, by the same shall he return. He shall not come into this city, saith the Lord." He's not going to come into the city. He's going to turn around and go back the way he came. "For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake." Because of me, so that everyone will know who I am, and to save the house of David that I put in place, I'm going to save Jerusalem. So it says, Then the angel of the Lord went forth, and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. When they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. That is a great line. Behold, they were all dead corpses. And, of course, when they arose early in the morning, kind of interesting, presumably some of them, the rest of them, arise early in the morning and see all these dead Assyrians. Now, 185,000 is a lot. 185,000 Assyrians is a huge number. It's once again maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but the idea is that a huge number of Assyrians have died. The attack is no longer tenable. They have to get out of Dodge, and that's what they're going to do. So, what does that mean? The angel of the Lord went forth and smote a whole bunch of Assyrians. Does that mean that literally an angel with a sword came through and just killed these guys one by one? Probably not. Presumably this is God sends a plague on them and they all die. There's a guy named Herodotus who talks about an event similar to this, and in fact it's so similar that we assume he is actually talking about this event. And his interpretation of the event is that a bunch of mice came out and chewed all the strings off of the bows of the Assyrians so they weren't able to fight. Kind of a funny thing, but that element of mice may actually be exactly what happened. So it could be, we'll see in later chapters, that there's a big disease that comes through. And this probably happens right around this time. There's a giant disease that sweeps through the whole area, gets Hezekiah sick, doesn't kill him, probably gets a lot of the Judites sick, but doesn't necessarily kill them, probably because they have better immunity to local diseases. But the Assyrians are from way far away. They have no immunity to local diseases. So when the rats and mice come out of the city carrying presumably this disease, they bring it into the camp. The Assyrians are totally decimated by it because they have no immunity. Things like this are actually alluded to in Deuteronomy, that there will be diseases that the Israelites have that everyone else will have problems with, and that these diseases will kill Israel's enemies for them. And this is probably exactly what's happening here. The Judites get kind of sick, but the Assyrians die. In fact, a huge number of them die. That's probably what's happening here. Now, does this mean that God didn't do it, that it was just a plague that happened? Well, no. Presumably God is calling down the plague. When it says the angel of the Lord, that's probably exactly what it means, that God calls down this plague and kills all these Assyrians. So it's being, the plague is being seen for what it is, from our perspective, which is divine help for Jerusalem. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed, and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And it came to pass, as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Shedrezer his sons smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. So the army is become so decimated that not only can they not take Jerusalem, but now they're afraid. It's in the earlier part of the chapter, it says he will have a blast sent against him, the plague. He will hear a rumor. Well, what is the rumor? We already heard about it earlier in the chapter. The rumor is the Nubians are coming. So now he's sitting there. He knows the Nubians are coming to destroy them. He probably could have stood up against them if he were able to take Jerusalem, but now his army is decimated, and Jerusalem is not taken, and the Nubians are coming. He has no options. He has to get out, and get out quickly. So he turns tail and runs home to Assyria. And when he worships in the house of Nisroch his god, one of the Assyrian gods, Adramelech and Shedrezer his sons kill him. In his own temple while he's worshipping, they stab him and kill him there, and run away into Armenia, Armenia was a little bit bigger back then than it is now, but it's a similar area, kind of the eastern Turkey area, and into what is Armenia today. Just north of the Assyrian Empire. Armenia is classically difficult to conquer, so it's an easy place to run away to. It's like Switzerland, lots of mountains. It has actually some good grain production in part of it, but it's just hard to get to, and it's just a pain. So they run away there, and Esarhaddon his son reigns in his stead. So the contrast here is very interesting. That Jehovah saves Jerusalem, but Nisroch, the god of Sennacherib, is not able to save him. While he's worshiping, he gets killed by his own sons. Whereas in this case, an entire army is obliterated by Jehovah. So there's a stark contrast. I think that's why it's placed there right next to each other, to remind you of the contrast. That false gods can't even save you while you're in the act of worshiping them. The true God can save an entire city, no problem. But this is a mixed victory, right? This is great. They won. We're happy about that. Good job. Thank you, Jehovah, for saving them. But what now? The rest of the country's been destroyed. Now they have to slowly start to pick up the pieces and spread out and reestablish themselves. And there is also some indication that there are other things that happened that required the temple to be renovated. We'll talk about that later. But this is, on the one hand, can be seen as unsettling, and a lot of people, I think, interpret it that way. Say, well, is this like a tie between Ashur and Jehovah? But I think we would say, no, it's not a tie. Jehovah was in control the whole time. That's what he says here. I called in the Assyrians to punish you. You finally repented, and now I saved you. And I think that this is really pertinent for us today. There are so many times where it might seem like your back is totally against the wall. You're, as it were, hopelessly outnumbered. You don't think anything could possibly save you. And then God says, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of you. That's exactly what he does in this case, and I think that for us, he can do exactly the same thing. If he can eliminate an army that is hopelessly outnumbering everybody in Jerusalem, can't he save us from the problems that we go through? I think he definitely can. So anyway, that's it for today. Chapter 37. We'll deal with some of the issues of chronology in the other chapters as we go through. More narrative for the next few chapters. So we will see you guys next time.